All right. It is now 1 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, and I know we have many different time zones represented, so welcome to everyone. Today is September 2nd, 2021. Welcome to session number 7 of the 20th Annual Northwest Interlibrary Loan and Resource Sharing Conference. NWILL wishes to acknowledge that the territory called North America, now primarily occupied by the descendants of European colonizers and other immigrants, is the rightful land of Indigenous, Native American, and First Nations populations. We are all responsible for understanding the history of colonization and genocide of Indigenous people and must commit to learning, building relationships, sharing stories, and taking action to support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and action. We encourage you to learn about the Indigenous peoples to whom the land you occupy rightfully belongs. Please visit the document section of the conference platform to learn more. This session is titled Tribal Library Service Panel and will be presented by Rachel Chong, Raymond Frogner, Manisha Khetearpal, LaFromboise, and Phillipa Rosman. I apologize if I ruined anyone's names. This session is being recorded with permission from the presenters. They retain the copyright to the information they are presenting and may request its removal from public viewing in the future by written request to the NWILL committee chairperson. However, at this time, it is planned that the recordings will be available once captions have been added. Attendees will be notified when recordings are available. If you have a question during the session, please use the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will pose these to the presenter at the end of the presentation. If you want to take advantage of captions or the live transcript, you will need to click the live captions button on the bottom toolbar to enable them and get them to show for you, as it is not automatic. The door prize keyword will be revealed between the at the very end of the presentation. Please see the door prize link in the Event Mobi menu to enter in the code from this session. When the Zoom webinar ends, please complete the post-session survey in Event Mobi. It is just one question, and it is in session feedback at the bottom of this session's page. On that note, you can stop listening to me, and I will turn the session over to our amazing presenters. Take it away.
Is that my cue?
Yes, Rachel, go ahead.
All right, if you could just flip to the next slide. All right, thank you. Tanshi Kioao, Rachel Dishnakashon, Delta Niwiquin, St. Boniface Doshin. I'm really grateful to Joshua Morin from Michif Cultural Connections in St. Albert for teaching me Michif, the language of my maternal grandfather and his ancestors, who I never had the pleasure of meeting in person, but I'm grateful to have relations from their descendants. And today I'm presenting on Indigenous information literacy, a free resource available to anybody to use. And this is a result of the work I'm doing at Kwantlen Polytechnic University on the traditional and unceded lands of the Kwantlen, the Khetearpal, the Semiahmoo, the Tsawwassen, the Kikite, and the Coquitlam peoples. So we can just move to the next slide there. So I started my work at Kwantlen Polytechnic University about 2 years ago. And part of the reason I was drawn to this work was being Indigenous, and I wanted to learn a little bit more about myself. And I also wanted to develop deeper relationships with the local First Nations where I live, because Michif people are not Indigenous to British Columbia or anywhere in this region, which we call the Lower Mainland. So if we just want to go to the next slide. Is it on the next slide? Okay, so hopefully the slide up there is why. So why Indigenous information literacy? This was the first project I took on when I joined Kwantlen Polytechnic University as the Indigenous Engagement and Subject Liaison Librarian. This was a new position, and a lot of it involved outreach with various community members at KPU. And so I did a lot of consultation and discussion with, it says not in slideshow mode in the chat. I'm going to keep going just for time, but I'm just talking a little bit about why we worked on Indigenous information literacy. And that's because I had some discussions with faculty. I talked to our elder in residence, like Khetearpal, and I also wanted to support Indigenous 1100 students specifically in fulfilling their assignments for school. Perfect. That's the next slide that we're going to move on to. So what is Indigenous information literacy? After consulting with particularly Indigenous faculty within our school, it seemed like there were some information gaps people didn't quite understand in terms of how to engage with Indigenous information. A lot of Indigenous information in print has been appropriated or stolen, or just plain out is incorrect, right? Like it wasn't even copied down correctly in the first place. And so making sure that people are aware of what's going on in terms of Indigenous information, particularly in the library where I work, you know, there's a lot of historic documents there, was really important. And so we started with a little video and a book chapter. So I should clarify, there is an Indigenous Information Literacy Pressbook, which is a free ebook, and there is a complimentary video series. So they go hand in hand together. And the first one is just an introduction. I call it Indigenous Foundations, and it just goes over some basic protocols of introductions and how to sort of situate yourself. The second chapter is about evaluating Indigenous sources for credibility. So that looks at things like, how do you determine if an author is credible? So looking at things like, how are they situating themselves within their community? How are they approaching their work? Are they following various protocols, etc.? So we dive into that a little bit in the second chapter. The third chapter, we look at how to find Indigenous voices, and this is specific to our Kwantlen Polytechnic University catalog, but could be practiced elsewhere as well. And this is where we have a local subject term for Indigenous authors. So we're going in and adding by hand when we find authors who are Indigenous, whose voices we want to, you know, amplify and promote within our collection, and we add that local subject heading. And so that way students, particularly in Indigenous 1100, they have requirements to find Indigenous voices as part of their research, and more instructors are adding this component into their assignments. So that just helps make it easier for everybody. The next section we're looking at, I really wanted to emphasize, you'll see there's like sections 1, 2, and 3, which sort of focus on the print sources. And then 4, 5, and 6, I wanted to shift into the focus on our oral histories, our oral sources. And so without going into too much detail, we did need to cover a little bit of the research ethics when we move into oral sources. And so I talk about the Tri-City Council Policy Statement 2 for ethical research done with Indigenous peoples in Canada in a good way. In chapter 4, and that's just some of the legal stuff, but it also talks about Indigenous ways of interacting with those. And, you know, sometimes even though we're following the government requirements, it's not always the best from an Indigenous perspective. So there's tips on how to go about that research if you are the one conducting oral history interviews and things like that. The next section is chapter 5, where we talk specifically about how to engage with elders and do that in a respectful way. And that draws really heavily off of the Khetearpal Conference Committee. They have a whole document outlining how to engage with elders. And so that section draws really heavily from there. And then finally, drawing on both the Northwest College citation model developed by Larissa McLeod and also some work being done at NWILL Library, there are recommendations for APA, MLA, and Chicago citation when citing oral elder sources. So we really wanted to emphasize in this second half that oral sources are credible, legitimate, and should be treated with the same respect as the way print sources are treated in academia. So that was that second chunk there. I think we're ready for the next slide. I don't know if it's working. All right, so this is just a snapshot of the Pressbook cover page and the Pressbook. I really wanted to, the Pressbook is a free ebook and it has additional material to the video. So each Pressbook chapter is prefaced by the video, and then there's additional content. Some of the content includes an evaluation and reflection section, which I took extra time to research what Indigenous educators had been saying about evaluation and how to sort of decolonize that and how to present evaluation in an a more Indigenous way. And so within the evaluation section, there's a lot of opportunity for reflection and practice and things like that. And then we'll just move to the last slide because I think I'm running over time. one of the things I ask students to do when assessing a source is to look at which protocols were followed. And so I need to talk a little bit about that, which I do in the Pressbook. And that is just, in addition to consulting with community, we did engage in acts of reciprocity and shared beadwork handmade by me to all the people who contributed to the ebook. So that's it, because I think I'm over time. I have my contact on the next slide, and I'm really just hoping that this work will benefit communities everywhere. And if you have questions, feel free to get in touch. It was made very specific, particularly the citation for Kwantlen Polytechnic University, with modifications made by our elder in residence, but a lot of the content can be transferred, I think. All right, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Next presenter is Aaron. Go ahead, Aaron.
All right. Okay. Nice to meet you, Aaron LaFromboise. I'm the library director at Medicine Spring Library, which is the academic library for Blackfeet Community College, the community library for Blackfeet Reservation, and the Blackfeet Tribal Archives. In this past year, we were rarely in the library as staff. And so, obviously our community wasn't in the library at all. So we started thinking, how can we actually reach our community? We had a lot of connectivity issues with everyone needing to be online every single day for either work or school. In the evenings, because we all had a little more access to the internet, we wanted to do things like streaming, and it slowed everything in our community down. So what was a way we could reach our community without adding more stress onto the network? So we came up with an idea of adding little free libraries in our communities. So the biggest question was, how can we reach our patrons when the doors aren't open? And being able to shift a little bit of funds that would have gone towards travel, we were able to purchase supplies to start building little free libraries. Neither me or my staff have a lot of carpentry skills, so I learned a lot in this last year on how to use tools, power tools. And so use some pictures of me working outside of the library, building boxes. This is my mom and my nephew. We all painted one of the libraries. And then this is just on Tuesday, the last picture, where we were kind of doing our final push to get these out. Where did we place these? The reservation is over 5 million acres, and we have several small communities. No incorporated townships or anything, so everything is just a local community. And so we placed, or will place, we have one more to place tomorrow, but we've placed 8 so far. And these are really the community centers around the reservation. So up here is Bab. St. Mary's is more of like a visitor type center. We're right next to Glacier National Park in Montana. And so we get a lot of outsiders. There's a lot of businesses that are only open in the summer, but not a lot of residents in St. Mary's. So we didn't choose to put anything there. East Glacier, Star School, our boarding dorm, Blackfoot. We have 2 in Browning, 1 in Heart Butte, and 1 in Seville. And I added 3 red dots for potential future libraries that we can put in more, another 1 in Browning, south of Browning, and then 2 in rural areas that would literally just be on the side of the road in areas where there are people who live, but there isn't a township or anything nearby. Our biggest questions were, where should they go? Because there isn't really a lot of centralized town type activities in a lot of these communities, who's going to take care of these? Are we going to take care of all 9 and, travel around the reservation a couple times a month? Or can we get people to adopt these and take care of them with our help? We're not asking people to just suddenly they're 100% responsible for them, but we do need people to keep an eye out. So we have, like in Heartbutte, it's right next to the school, but one of the librarian at the school is going to watch over it, and she lives nearby, so she can keep an eye on it after hours. Out at the boarding dorm, we had a community member down there paint the box, and so she is willing to keep an eye on it, but it's in a more central place in that community so that people don't have to try to go to her yard specifically. In Star School, same type of situation where it's near the school, but you know, people in the community will keep an eye on it. My husband's family is from Star School, so that one I'm taking a little more of a personal responsibility for. Out at Blackfoot, one of our staff members lives out there, so she's doing the same in Blackfoot. And East Glacier, a local artist, has it outside of her studio. Up in Bab, it's outside of a local restaurant. And then near our skate park, it's across the street in one of the college staff members' yards. And then at the Veterans Park, because it's fairly close to where we are, that one we will take full responsibility for. Yeah, how did we get books for them? We have put out several solicitations throughout the state, and we've received about 15, that's way too many. We've received about 30, not 30, 3,000, sorry, adding zeros where I don't need to, the 3,000 books so far. Community members, now that they know that they can put books in these libraries, are really excited to help out with maintaining the, you know, give a book, take a book access. And we've had them out only for about a month. There's been a lot of really great response so far. And we are really looking forward to being able to reach our communities that we don't necessarily have a physical presence in year round, but now we have, even if it's just our little free libraries, we have a little bit of a presence in all of our communities so that nobody has to feel like they're left out or they're too far away to come into the library to check out materials. So really quick about that, you can always contact me for more information, and I will go on to the next presenter. Thank you.
Phillipa, our next presenter is Phillipa, and she'll be speaking about how to set up a oral history collection.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome. This talk I'm giving, this is an abbreviated version of a presentation I did last month for Manisha's micro learning session. And my name's Phillipa Rosman. I'm the branch librarian of the Dine College Library Shiprock campus. And I work on the Navajo Nation. My ancestral background is I'm half San Carlos Apache Indian and half Black, half African American. So I titled my talk for Manisha's microlearning series, Creating an Oral History Collection with Limited Experience and Resources, because I understand that a lot of the tribal libraries have limited staffing and limited resources. So I just wanted to encourage people to do something on their own. And with that in mind, that there might not be that much formal learning about it, I just thought I would give a little overview of how someone can start. And why oral history for tribal libraries and archives? I like oral histories because they're subjective historical narratives and they provide unique perspectives. And I think they're a wonderful complement to traditional sources of information. And another thing I like about oral history methodology, especially for tribal communities, is that I feel it complements the oral tradition of many tribal organizations. So in summary, I always think of it as tell our own stories in our own voices. And so during my original discussion, I just talked about the oral history process, and that's how to decide on a historical event, a period, or a subject, the research involved in presenting or developing your topic, and particularly the preliminary documents. That might be something that people without experience, they might not think about that. There's a process about selecting interview candidates and going through the interview process. And I provided some information about best practices, pretty much regarding the format of the interviews, what kind of, if you want to do just audio or audio and visual, and of course the ethics involved in conducting an oral history interview. And lastly, what I went over was the how to process the interviews. I've run into lots of situations where people had created a substantial collection of interviews, but very little documentation was also created. That's on the front end and on the back end. So in my discussion and the handouts that I believe will be provided with a copy of the slides for this organization, I go over information on how to, the kind of documentation that would be helpful, particularly if someone has a successor coming behind them. A lot of times these kind of projects, they might either lose funding midstream, or again, people might leave. So having some kind of documentation in place where somebody coming behind will be able to pick up and carry on is something to think about, and it's valuable to have. And just for this presentation, I included some helpful online resources. The International Organization of the Oral History Association, the Oral History Association. In producing the slides for this presentation, I came across Groundswell, and that looked like a really interesting organization. So I particularly encourage people to look into that. And then the Oral History Society. So that's pretty much my talk for this portion. And again, if anybody has any questions, post in the chat, and I will hand this off to my next colleague. Thank you very much.
Oh. I'm sorry. Tansei Raymond Frogner Netigason, Notari Oscar Egua Nigari Doris, Netatoskan, National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Hello, my name is Raymond Frogner. I'm the head of archives for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. I'm speaking to you today on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. So what I'd like to do today is just talk a bit about how we provide access at the NCTR, some of the projects that we've been doing lately to promote access to our holdings, and give a better understanding of how these holdings came together. Because as everyone knows, as doing research in archives, the first question is how did this collection of records come to exist? Understanding the provenance and context of the archives to better understand how to interrogate those records. And in the case of the NCTR archives, how to interrogate oppression, the records of the Indian residential school history and legacy. So to begin with, it's important to understand that that the NCTR came about as an agreement from the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement, which was set in 2007. And it was created to put an end to more than 4,000 lawsuits involving more than 10,000 plaintiffs who were suing Canada and the Christian churches that operated Indian residential schools. But the IRSA did not invent the idea of creating a national research center. Before that, there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, which also recommended a similar center. And to be perfectly clear, the Cowichan petition of 1911 was the first formal legal argument mounted by Indigenous communities to argue for Indigenous rights and titles. So for several generations, a center such as this has been requested by the various sets of Indigenous communities. So we're actually created through Schedule N of the IRSA, which gives us a certain set of mandates, beginning with to acknowledge residential school experiences, impacts and their consequences, provide a holistic, culturally appropriate and safe setting for former students, their families and communities to investigate these issues, witness, support, promote and facilitate truth and reconciliation events, promote awareness and public education of Canadians about the Indian residential school system and its impacts, and finally, identify sources and create as complete as possible an historical record of the Indian residential school system and its legacies. So just to give you an idea about the difficulties of pulling together the documentary evidence of residential schools, one of the issues was authorities, identifying who created these records. And as the IRSA was an agreement to recognize the responsibility of both church organizations and the federal government, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was the original commission that was tasked to find these documents, in the end consulted 104 different repositories across the country that were affiliated with a religious order. The Sisters of Charity of Halifax, Presbyterian Church, United Church General Council, Les Aubats de Marie Immaculée du Manitoba, Oblates of Manitoba, as well as 47 different sets of government records across different departments. Now, these are the authorities of records. It's also important to recognize that these records were set out and in fragments across the country in different locations. To just give one example, the Oblate records of Grandin Province, which is English Canada and Western Canada. The Oblate records are located in several different repositories: the Provincial Archives of Alberta, Société Historique de Saint Boniface, the Royal BC Museum, the Vancouver Diocese, and the Provincial Archives of Saskatchewan. And it's also known that some church dioceses across the West hold some small sets of records that are related to the Oblates and their operations of residential schools. So the challenge was pulling together from all of these diverse locations and sources a set of records that would be able to be researched and consulted. Now, those are the records themselves, and I should emphasize that those records were digitized and the copies were brought to the NCTR for research purposes. There was also the legacy of Indian residential schools, and to consult and get an idea of this concept, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission visited over 200 Indigenous communities across the country over 6 years to acquire private statements that survivors and intergenerational survivors were not comfortable sharing in a public venue, but nevertheless wanted to have their stories recorded for future generations to use, as well as public venues such as sharing circles and sharing panels, public events where people could come and share their stories about the impact of residential schools on their lives and their families' lives. So for a total of, the TRC collected a total of 6,757 statements by survivors and intergenerational survivors. Since then, the NCTR has continued to acquire oral histories about the impact of residential schools, and the amount of statements that we now hold at the center is approaching 7,500. So to give you an overall example, the NCTR is actually about 95% digital. And as I said, the textual records were digitized and pulled together at the center. And the AV files were made in public and private hearings. The total number of AV files, as I say here, is 44,805. That includes outtakes, B-rolls, and other pieces of recording that don't necessarily make up the final draft of a recorded statement. That also includes audio as well as photographs for a total size of slightly over 106 terabytes. And by duration, over 2,000 hours of witness statements. And combined with the maps, other photos, building plans, etc., the digital files at the NCTR total over 240 terabytes of material. So of course, as you can imagine, to bring this all together and make it into a coherent database that can be shared in a way that's useful for Indigenous communities for their own understandings and purposes is an enormous challenge. And so one of the things that we tried to do or recognize we needed to do at the NCTR, and I should point out the NCTR in 2015 inherited all of this material from the TRC. So we were tasked with trying to develop an IT architecture that could handle all of these different sources and make them available. So we turned to looking at all our options. We turned to something called the Canada Foundation for Innovation Grant, the CFI. And the CFI is generally used for science, actually. And it's used for technology development to support economic growth and provide job opportunities that include technology development. So it was a difficult argument for us to make. And I'll say we did get the grant. It's over $6 million. And we were the first social sciences application from the University of Manitoba to be able to ever get a CFI in the history of the university. So the first thing we had to do was to try and define the work of developing the IT under the parameters of the CFI, which basically supplies laboratories, supports databases, specimen analysis, that kind of thing. So one thing we wrote about is, first of all, that we are reframing the concept of innovative research as decolonization, which is the purpose, one of the purposes of the center is to decolonize the understanding of the records of residential schools. So as I say in the proposal, the project implements the NCTR's digital architecture to enable advanced discovery and access to digital archive records to promote innovative research meaningful to Indigenous communities. It uniquely provides researchers materials to theorize oppression and disrupt colonial relationships between academic researchers and Indigenous communities. So we spun the concept of research as decolonization. Secondly, we brought the idea of innovative research into the history of residential school experience. So as I say in the proposal, the infrastructure we asked for would enable digital projects such as identifying the children that were lost at residential school, to discover the locations of unmarked residential school children's grave sites, to create statistical analysis of the health and welfare legacy of residential schools, to design collaborative and innovative health and education programs with Indigenous communities. And as I say, the infrastructure promotes reconciliation through acknowledgement. It is a recognition that we are what we choose to remember, but we're also what we choose to forget. In the proposal, I go through a bunch of details about what do I mean when I talk about decolonizing archive. So I make these points and I'll say that this is available. I don't want to read too much out, but I want to emphasize that we were working on creating a decolonizing archive when we got the grant. So just a couple of points just to make clear. Our concept of a decolonizing archive is a living archive, a place of gathering and participation. It does not preserve static records frozen in time, but recognizes their dynamic, evolving intergenerational meaning for communities and individuals. It provides a social memory infrastructure that supports Indigenous cognitive practices, Indigenous knowledge methods and social protocols, the knowledge of elders, the meanings of ceremonies, and expressions of art as social organization rather than simple artistic expression. So I won't go into the crunching details too much, but the result of the CFI, as a result of the CFI, we were able to undertake several important projects. One, upgrade our IT infrastructure to better manage the records that we hold and make them more available. collaborate with the National Film Board of Canada to preserve and make accessible the survivor statements, which I had mentioned above, to ensure that they're easily accessible and that they will be preserved in a preservation format for future generations to use. We'll also be collaborating with the Manitoba Center for Health Policy to study the adult health legacy of childhood residential school trauma, to take the evidence created from this study to design, in partnership with Indigenous communities, new models of healthcare delivery, child welfare, and education programs, to essentially to study the impact of childhood trauma on subsequent generations. And finally, to design free NCTR data workshops. These workshops will be freely available to Indigenous communities to come and learn more sophisticated ways to use data analysis and just to study the records that we hold at the center, so that these communities can then turn around and use this information in presentations, grant applications, band council planning, and that kind of thing. And finally, of course, this would be an open source IT platform, which would allow us to collaborate on participatory applications. So for example, we're now working on a digital photograph description application, which would allow communities to log into the center's site and add descriptions to photographs that are currently undescribed, photographs of children at residential schools. So again, I'll just to go through this a bit more quickly, this is the information architecture. We got funding to clean the data, code it, format it, make it available for data transfer. And as I'll show you in a minute, we were able to design a new site to make the databases accessible and merge all the various data sets that I've mentioned, the 104 religious orders, the 46 government sites, so that it can be pulled together and searchable as a unit. This is the NFB, as I mentioned, making copies and preserving the audiovisual files that were the statements of survivors. And again, this is just the name of the rest of that, the project. I won't go, I don't realize time is pressing. So the last thing I want to show is this is for the site. Going to work. So this is our site. One of the other projects I wanted to demonstrate to you is we're also undertaking a study of children who were lost and documented in our records. So in volume 5 of the Truth and Reconciliation's final report, they did identify a certain number of children that were lost at residential school. We've picked up on that study because it's incomplete. And so we verified the records that the TRC identified. They went through slightly under 1 million of our over 4 million records that we hold. We're now going through the rest of our records. To date, we've found 4,108 evidence of 4,108 children, 118 children lost at residential school. And by consulting with communities for over 7 months, communities across the country, we determined that we could do a commemorative site that would allow a certain amount of information on the site, the name of the child, the name of the school, and the date of death. That was agreed upon by numerous communities across the country as a suitable set of information. We've also created a database that profiles the identity of each child that was lost at schools. That database is restricted just to families for access. Otherwise, there can be special permission provided if anyone else wants to get access to these records. And as you might have heard, recently there have been some discoveries of unmarked burials next to residential schools, and I think this will be an ongoing process of discovery. In those cases, we will supply what we know of for evidence of the children lost at those schools, so that those communities can go forward with their unmarked gravesite discoveries. So I'll just give you one quick example. This is the memorial site. You can search by name. And before I go any further, I'd like to point out there's also a crisis line if anyone needs any kind of assistance if they're triggered by going through these sites, they can get assistance and some counseling for mental health. But you can search by name, search by school, or see the entire register. And one final interactive service that we're adding is the map. There it is. This indicates the location of every residential school in the settlement agreement. You can click on that and get a brief thumbnail profile of the school. From this, you can go back into our site and do a search on all the records of that school if you're searching for a particular person. We also provide a service for survivors who would like to know more about a particular relative's attendance. These survivor inquiries are in fact our principal priority for reference. So if we do get a survivor's inquiry, it opens a case file and we produce every document we can find on the history of that child's attendance at a residential school, and it goes out to that relative. So that's another service that we provide for access to the records. And I think that's about everything. So I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Manisha, you're muted if you're speaking.
Manisha Nitsigasun Notavi Balwant Nigavi Bimla Nita Toskan Masnaikan Kamik Maskwacis Cultural College Mistahi Nina Naskamon Pematis Sowen Emikosian. My name is Manisha and I work with the Maskwacis Cultural College, and I introduced myself in Maskwacis Plains Cree Y dialect. Indigenous knowledge is weaved in the indigenous languages. So here is a map to show you which are the other tribes located in my area. Maskwa means bear, Wachis is hills. So Maskwacis means bear hills. And the kinship, when I introduce myself, my name is kinship is very important. Raymond also introduced himself in Plains Cree. Nitsi means belly button. So when we are introducing ourselves, kinship relationship is important. We are saying the names of our parents. Nitsi means belly button, which means I come from this family. I'm going to just share with you about a micro-learning program. We are a very small college located on the Maskwacis Reserve, which has 4 Cree nations. And we started this micro-learning program as a result of, COVID was there, our students needed practicum opportunities. So we started offering short 20, 30, 40-minute learning sessions. They were delivered in a variety of formats. The main need was because our students needed practicum opportunities and they could not go to in-person sites. So we created the micro-learning sessions. And in the chat, I have posted the link for the sessions. What began as a practicum opportunity for students moved on into the next phase as staff training and development opportunities. And we offered so many programs across many different areas, right from technology to collecting content for our sociology courses, online teaching and learning, many sessions about Indigenous and GLAM. GLAM is galleries, libraries, archives, museums together, mental health sessions. So we offered, we broke it down micro-learning across 2-3 days. We offered mental health certification courses. Many Cree language free sessions about learning the language. And Raymond attended one of those sessions on Wednesdays during lunchtime. We had lunch and learn Cree. And I'm including this slide. I'm almost at the end of my presentation here, in the end rather than the beginning, because that is the way in which Maskwacis community functions. It's storytelling. And so here is my final message about the micro-learning program. Our goal, our vision is to make learning possible for everyone via ethical reciprocity. So when you're working with Indigenous communities, Ethical reciprocity is very important. Giving gifts is very important. The mission of our microlearning program is to build learning circles and networks where learners will gain knowledge and skills which are transferable across a variety of settings. And at the same time, they will make new connections. My last slide for this panel is a call for partnership for microlearning programs. So what does this microlearning mean to all of you? One, you can add it as your program calendar, regardless if you are in a public library, special library, tribal library, academic library. This is a way in which you can increase the program offerings. And second, we have generated more than 300 recorded sessions, PowerPoint slides, links. It's an open education resource which we are creating from these microlearning sessions. And you can use it for professional development and training of your staff. And thirdly, it can be used as content if you are creating open education courses. Now we are pleased to take some questions, and I know some of these questions have been answered when we were working. So Rebecca is posing a question, and this is for Raymond. How did you determine that the grant you got was one to try for, even though National Council of Truth and Reconciliation's work is not as a typical recipient?
We actually applied for many grants. This one, we thought we could spin out as IT architecture, which was our biggest priority. So we were looking for any large grant that would support IT architecture. And it was a huge grant. It's over 100 pages. It has, I'm the principal investigator, but we had 10 participants, and the adjudication took almost 12 months to come for a final decision. So it is an enormous grant. It was, I mean, we just hoped for the best, and it was an IT architecture grant. That's why we went for it.
So on behalf of all of us in this learning circle, I'd like to thank my panel presenters.
I have one more question I want us to squeeze in because I think we have time.
Go ahead.
It's sitting in the answered queue. What tips do you have to help libraries create a collection based on Indigenous authors? And I believe Rachel wanted to answer that one. I think we have just a few minutes.
Do you want me to do that one live?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So we've used a variety of sources for that one. The first thing I would recommend is going to Indigenous publishers. So people like Strong Nations, Thetis. There's a few. If you're not familiar with them, actually UBC has a list on their website there at NWILL Library, and they list Indigenous publishers. And you can just go through there, and they're going to feature predominantly Indigenous authors. So that's one way you can start becoming familiar with and building Indigenous authored collections. Another way is, working with your existing collection, just looking at the book covers. Often, on the little bio, they'll disclose if they're Indigenous or not. If you're not sure, you can always Google, which is what we often do. And you can also come to the KPU library site and just do the Indigenous author search. There's a video tutorial on how to, and you can see what's in our collection. And we have some caveats to our authors. Like we include, we have to put the link on the item, not the actual author. So you might see like in a edited work that it'll have Indigenous authors, but not everyone is Indigenous, right? Like maybe one of the chapters is by someone Indigenous. So I just wanted to note that in case you go there and you think they're all Indigenous, just read it carefully. That's all. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that got answered because I think that would be of interest to other attendees. But yeah, I think we're a little bit over, but yeah, thank you everyone so much. Thank you so much to all of our amazing presenters. I think this was super awesome. I'm so glad you're here, and we have copies of PowerPoints and slides and documents in the Documents tab of Event Mobi, as well as on the session page. Please take a few minutes to, just a quick moment to fill out our post-session evaluation. These really help us out when we're planning next year's conference. And thank you everyone so much for attending. This was really, really great.